Hey everyone! From the time I'm recording this video, yesterday I built my mum and dad their new computer. I'm pretty happy with it. Except for the cable management rat's nest that really couldn't be avoided. But anyway, I didn't really want this video to be about how to build a computer, although I do have some tips and tricks, I guess. I've intentionally built them a mismatched system. Reason being is basically mum wanted something that was future-proof, and she wanted something, I guess, mid-range gaming, not that she was going to use it, just in case my brothers need something a little bit more powerful for schooling, depending on what subjects they picked. And I'm like, no, you don't need to worry about that at the moment. So I've built them something that will be good for them at the time being, completely mismatched at the moment, but at the same time, it allows for future-proofing in a sense of upgradability in the future if needed. That's that. I don't really want to go through the parts all too much, because I don't think that's really necessary for this video as much, but it's using a AMD Ryzen R5 1600AF, which is basically a 2600, just downclocked a little bit. Its graphics card, and this is where it gets a bit mismatched, is an Asus GT710. It's really all that mum and dad need for a graphics card. The RAM is, God, I can't remember what brand it is, but it runs at 3200 megahertz because Ryzen likes faster RAM. And it's 16 gigabytes of it. That's it. The case was a Silverstone PS15, I think it was. Might be wrong. It's not a spectacular case. I got the RGB version from mum. I thought, you know what, the $10, pretty lights, why not? So yeah, let's get to the time lapse and then I'll talk about the build from my experience. Alright, so there's the build. I thought I had it filming when I installed the graphics card. I did the graphics card and the final touches of cable management after dinner. I did everything else before dinner. But I thought I was filming for the graphics card and, well, I wasn't. I fixed that. Anyway, so that's that. I don't think it's a big deal. The graphics card isn't all that spectacular anyway. So, go camera. Build notes, I guess, were for anyone building a Ryzen based system with a stock cooler. It wouldn't hurt to take off the stock thermal paste on the cooler. I have heard stories of that thermal paste being excessively tacky, very tacky, very gluey. And if you were to take that cooler off the CPU using the stock paste, you actually run the risk, because it's so gluey and tacky, that when you pull the cooler off, that you can pull the CPU out of its socket. You could damage the socket, you could damage the pins on the CPU with that. So the tip is, if you're using a stock AMD cooler, change the thermal paste. It's worth it. Other build notes are, and okay, I should know better, but when I was installing the cooler, I didn't tighten the screws in the right order, and that gave me some issues in the sense of, because there's spring tension, I had to loosen some screws to tighten screws. So for installing a cooler, you should go in an X pattern because there's 4 screws. That way you're keeping it all nice and even, you're keeping the pressure nice and even. So yeah, that's my mistake though. Again, I should know better. Other than that, there wasn't all too much going on. It's a pretty case for the price point. For the price point though, like, it was only a $50 Australian case. It was $60, maybe 70. But for that price point here, you're not getting much. It looks like a really good airflow case actually, but there's no PSU shroud to hide the PSU. So with that, there's also no shrouds to hide your excess cables. And also at that price point, understandably, there isn't much room between the back panel and the motherboard tray to put cables. Especially your spare SATA cables and Molex cables if you're going to have spare headers. There's not much room for those to be. So I've had to make do. I managed to fit the Molex cables in between the motherboard panel and the back side plate. I know what I'm talking about, I hope you do. But for the SATA cables, I actually decided that I didn't want to have them zip tied down. So I just put it with the already cable mess coming out of the power supply. Not that it was much. I had a fully modular power supply. I will get to that actually. But I just put the Molex cables loose with the other power supply cables that were coming from the power supply, just in case another hard drive or an SSD gets installed. It's easy access for that cable instead of having to cut zip ties. Really, two more things. Power supply. I wouldn't say I splurged on the power supply as much. I got a decent power supply, a Silverstone something. It was 650 watts, 80 plus, bronze or gold. I can't remember. God, my memory is bad today. By the way, it had beautiful black cables. There was no ketchup and mustard cables, as Bitwit would call them. So there was no like colourful wires coming out of the power supply. So that was actually quite a surprise. But the reason why I opted for modular was because I knew there wasn't going to be much cable management space. So the less cables I had to deal with, the better. And lastly, the CPU. For the CPU to work, I had to update the BIOS on the motherboard, as demonstrated in my how to use BIOS flashback video. I'll have a card up in my top right. But when I was in Dragon Center, it was saying that the voltages were going, I wouldn't say well beyond, but just a little bit over 1.4 volts. And I thought for what's really second gen Ryzen, that was a lot of voltage. Like I wouldn't even pump that on my 8700K with it being overclocked. So I downloaded Hardware Monitor and Cinebench and double checked that Dragon Center was reading the voltages correctly. Not that I doubted it, I just wanted a program that I'm used to, basically. And sure enough, 1.4. So I went into the BIOS, set it to 1.2. That was too little. So I set it to 1.3. I didn't really feel like at the point in time having to deal with let's find the optimal voltage setting. So I just put it up by 0.1 of a volt. So it was set to 1.3 volts. It worked. And I'm going, okay, for what my parents are going to be using this for, it's going to be not stressful. It's going to be fine. Set as this. So that's what I stuck with. That's what I decided, you know what, that's good enough. And yeah, that's really it. That's my experience building my parents' PCs. So again, builder's notes, get a modular power supply. It's really helpful, especially if you're getting a cheaper case, because you have less cables in your system to cable manage. If you're using a stock cooler for AMD Ryzen, do change the thermal paste. It'll be better in the long run of when you change cooler or if you change CPU. It's not as much of a when, more than if, but if you think that might happen in the future, definitely look at doing it, but that's your choice. And if you don't, that's your choice. Reap the consequences, I guess. For the CPU to work, a BIOS update was needed. Thank God for BIOS flashback. So that's really it. I've been told I shouldn't be using ending talk at the end of the video, but I am. The next video is going to be me explaining the rationale I used for building this PC, as well as explaining why it's so hard to future-proof a computer. So if you want to see that video and more, check out my channel, subscribe to me. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, comment down below what you liked about it, and I hope that I see you all next time in the next video. See ya.